This is the way a drop looked. This one is daylight. It was probably the Holland invasion. D-Day was at night. The Holland invasion was in the daytime. We took 2 loads of paratroopers in the Holland invasion, and then many supply drops. I was 21. This was made in England, and I joined the Air Corps after Pearl Harbor. When they bombed Pearl Harbor, I stayed home for Christmas and New Year's, and then I went to Spartanburg, South Carolina, because I wanted in the Air Corps. So I joined the Air Corps. Second day of January, they told me to come back on the 6th, wear as little clothes as I could, because I'd have to send them all home. And so that's when I officially became a member of the Air Corps, was on January 6th. And I took all the exams and passed them to be a pilot, but my left ear had hearing default, and so I couldn't be a pilot, but they said you could be a flight engineer or a flying radio operator. And so they didn't have any schools. We were just getting organized. And so I said, well, wherever you have the first school, you send me. So I wound up in Kansas City, TWA Atlanta Radio School for the Air Corps, and that's where I went to school. I was born in a little town of Girton, North Carolina, at the top of the mountains, going to Asheville on U.S. Highway 74. And that is the Bearwalla Baptist Church as it stands on the side of the highway, and it looks just like that still today. That's the first church I went to. I went to work out of high school at the Elmore Corporation in Spindale, and Mr. Elmore had a son who was a doctor and a daughter who married a doctor, and I don't know, I guess he took an interest in me. I had good jobs at Elmore, and I moved up the ladder, and my last 14 or 15 years there, I was president of the company. And when I retired, Bell and Hemingway, a New York firm, bought us out. I'll tell you a little story about that. I had to go to New York 4 times a year for quarterly meetings. And I was sitting at a table having lunch with Sam Hausman, who was chairman of the board of Bell and Hemingway, and we were discussing, and he said, where'd you go to school? I said, well, I went to FLU. He said, where's that? I never heard of it. And I said, well, that's Frog Level University, grades 1 through 7. And he said, well, and I said, and then I went on to high school, and then I went to work at Elmore, and you see me here today. And you didn't go to college? I said, no. He said, it didn't hurt you, did it? I said, no, it didn't hurt me. Oh, this is the radio school in Kansas City, and that's the memorial to World War I up above, I think it's Walnut Street, I'm not sure. But we lived at the YMCA, and we went up there for our calisthenics, and I'm in there, I have me and pointed to me.
Yeah. You see where he wrote me?
This is before D-Day. We were briefed, of course, to go on the 5th, and the weather was bad, so they marched us to and from the mess hall, locked us up in barracks, and made sure we didn't escape. But this is right before we started loading the planes. That's Vice Air Marshal Mallory is speaking to us. I pointed myself out there, and also General Eisenhower was talking to the 101st Paratroopers. And so after all this, we began to load the planes. And my plane was in the group who dropped the Pathfinders. That's my plane, but it has an error. That's C.J. Butch. My pilot was Major Mann. He had a little boy named Butch. And so the plane was named Butch. But this picture was found in England, in Aldermaston, by an English friend of mine who's in the Royal Air Force. And he sent it to me. And I said, where did that A come from on the tail? And he said, well, this is on the picture. I said, well, it never was on my plane. there was always a P. And he said, well, he probably changed it because he thought the squadron commander should have an A, but it always had a P. And that's my crew. That's Major Mann. And the engineer on the left was Beck, and he failed his physical and had to go home. So he was replaced by Harold Newsom, younger man from Texas. Very nice fellow. We're still friends today. And I'm on this end. This is the paratroopers inside the plane. They're lined up, and the door is right here, and they're getting ready to go when the green light was turned on. This is again the drop. That was probably Holland. Yeah, I made this picture myself out the window of my plane. He was our right wing flying man.
And Ray, your plane was the first in.
Yeah, well, I was in the lead plane. Now in the Pathfinders on D-Day, Colonel Crouch led the lead plane, but Major Mann was selected to fly with that group, so I was in that group as well as two later flights, which we were the lead plane.
But you were the first ones in.
Yes. Yeah, we took in 2 glider planes D-Day, and then, as I say, we did the Pathfinders, and then 2 more drops. This is a painting by Larry Selman, and he gave me a print of that. Looks what a daylight drop looked like.
A day in the life.
I may have told you, we did D-Day was all at night, and there was a lot of problems. And it was decided by all the generals that there would never be another nighttime drop. It would be daylight from then on. Well, about 8 or 10 days after the engineers cleaned off all those obstacles on the beach, when the tide was out, we actually landed on the beach. We took in ammunition and supplies, and the engineers put down metal strips for us to taxi up close to the bank. And we unloaded the plane, and then we put up the litters and brought out wounded. We could carry 2, 3, 6, 9, 12, 15. We could carry 15 wounded. On one flight, I remember we had 2 wounded Germans. One of them talked to me, but the other wouldn't talk. This just shows the beach area, and we dropped over near St. Mary Glees. Yeah, we ferried a lot of gasoline and other supplies to Patton as he drove across France. And I'll tell you a little story about General Patton. We were near Bastogne, and we just landed in a pasture anywhere, and we were sitting there unloading the plane. We had gasoline, and 2 Jeeps pulled up, and one of them said to me, "Who's in charge?" And I said, "Major Mann." He said, "We'd like to see him." So I went up to the cockpit and got him. He came down and he left with them in the Jeeps. Came back in about 20 minutes, and we said, "What in the world did he want?" And he said, it was General Patton. And he said, "Well, I won't use his language, I'll abbreviate a little bit." He said he appreciated all the gasoline we were bringing, but would we please bring him a load of GD socks? So the next day we took him socks. And that was as close as I ever got to Patton, I'm sure. This is how the plane looked underneath. We had 6 pair of racks. We had supplies there ready to drop. This is shows paratroopers dropping, and maybe, is there a glider in that landing? I'm not sure, I don't see one.
You're dropping supplies at Bastogne.
Yeah, oh yes, this is dropping supplies at Bastogne. I'm sorry, couldn't turn my head that far. It was either Christmas Eve day or Christmas Day. The weather cleared enough for us to fly. It had been bad for a week and a half. Nobody could fly, and Bastogne was in real trouble. But either Christmas Day or Christmas Eve day, we were able to start flying and dropping supplies. We were taking the 101st Troopers down to Nice, France for R&R since they had been in so many battles. And when we'd take a load down, we would spend the night, naturally, got to spend one night, in Nice, France. And so I happened to be in Nice. We'd taken a load down when the war ended. You talk about a wild night. Nobody went to bed that night. It was some celebration. And this is several, well, it was my group and probably other groups. We were flying into Germany and loading up our liberated POWs and bringing them out. We had those big tent cities. We had one tent city where young girls who had been servants to Germans, they were Polish or some other nationality, and we built a tent city for them so we could check them all out. And we could talk to one or two that talk English. We went up to the fence and talked to them through the fence. But they were certainly glad to be liberated. This is getting the plane ready to come home after the war was over. Changing engines, so every engine was new when we started home. We flew the same planes over and the same planes back. And although we lost plane D-Day and across the Rhine, my plane never got a scratch. Never got a scratch. Yeah, this is standing on the wing of the plane, and you can't see them too well, but all the missions are painted. Little gliders for glider tows. There are 2 of those up there, and 6 parachutes for paradrops, and then all Red Cross for evacuation of wounded, and then all those little box cars you see coming down the line is, I don't know how many of them, probably 80 or 90, with supply trips for PEP. That was all of my missions before we started home. I had about 996 combat hours. Okay, this is my good friend George Egan from New York, and George and I were good friends, and we stayed in touch after the war. And when I'd go to New York, we'd get together for dinner, and we, the family, stayed in touch. And I'm in touch today with his son, John Egan, who is out in Gainesville, Texas. We talk on, we text each other on this telephone. And George, no, I didn't tell you about getting the Jeep, did I? George had a brother who was killed in Bastogne. And so they were getting the planes ready to come home, and us radio men didn't have anything to do. What can you do to radios? They were ready to work. So we went in and asked Major Mann if we could get a pass and a Jeep. George had a brother who was killed, and we'd like to find where he's buried. So the major looked at me and he said, well, he was my pilot, you know, as well as commander, and a very nice man, Major Mann from Alliance, Nebraska. Anyway, he said, do you both drive? We said, yes, sir. He said, see your driver's license. So we showed him the driver's license. He wrote us out 3-day pass apiece, called the motor pool, and they sent a Jeep around with extra gasoline cans and said, here you are. So we left and we found where George's brother was buried. Yeah. They brought George's brother back home. He's now buried in New York. Yeah, this is, I don't ever remember being really afraid. I guess we were trained not to be afraid, but I remember there was quite a bit of flak, especially those D-Day drops. And then when we were going into Holland on the parachute drop, and this is written in a book that I got out of Duke Library, just word for word, like I'll tell you. There was 2 P-38s escorting us, and we were coming to anti-aircraft emplacement, German, and they began firing at us. And they were a group on one side, group on the other side. We couldn't move. We were headed straight toward it. And these 2 P-38s, the first one peeled off, went down and dropped his bombs and blew about half of it up, but they shot his plane. He put the nose in the air and bailed out. We watched him go down. But then the other plane, P-38, finished knocking it out. So a lot of lives were saved by that incident. And it's written in that book almost just like I told you. Now, this is the beginning of troop care. This is a picture made at Polk Field in Fort Bragg while I was waiting to go to school in Kansas City. I'm in that, and that group was the beginning of troop care. It was formed and began at Polk Field at Fort Bragg. Of course, I left Fort Bragg and I was stationed in Texas twice, and in Alliance, Nebraska last time, and that's where I left to come overseas. This is 4 of us brothers. We were all in service, and all of us came home. And the one at the top had a very rough experience. He took jungle rot in New Guinea, and they advised me he would not live to reach San Diego, but he did. And he stayed in the hospital for probably nearly 2 years. All his skin came off, and a lot of things happened, but he did survive. So we all survived. Now, 70 years later, on June 6, 2014, I didn't know there was such a thing, but Charlie Vess and I, 101st Paratrooper, went over to England and France in 2012 on our own. We joined a tour group in Paris, and we enjoyed that trip. And then I didn't know there was such a thing as the Greatest Generation Foundation. They got in touch with me and some other veterans. They were about, I believe, 12 of us. They took us over to England and then to France for the 70th anniversary of the DDay. And then they took us back in September to the 70th anniversary of the Holland invasion, since I was in both of those. And I'd made so many friends and met so many people. A young lady, Valerie, she's a French lady. She works for a college, and she and the students have projects and make money, and she brings veterans over there that can't afford to come. And she's been over here 3 times, I think. She spent, 4 times, Stanley said. And she spent 4 or 5 days with us year before last. And I see her every time she comes. I go to Raleigh to my daughter's, and she's down around the Fort Bragg area. So I go down there and see her. She's coming back in July. We had a luncheon at Portsmouth getting ready to come to France. And you see me with that lady sitting in my lap. I don't know how that happened. We all came out from having lunch and sat down to have this picture made. And this lady waited on us. And so all of a sudden, she said, "Wait a minute, I wanted that picture." And she came running out and sat down on my lap. Now, this was taken when I went in 2016 with my family. They had a C-47 there, and I was able to get aboard. All of us were, and I'm sitting up in the pilot seat. That's the radio compartment in that airplane. Looks about the same as it did. And they had probably a 3-hour drop of paratroopers. They just continually dropped, and we were all out on this big open field and watching them drop, and had a luncheon for us and places to sit. Now, the story behind this is a friend of mine was standing talking to, I believe it was General LeMay, who's in charge over now in Netherlands, in charge of NATO. Anyway, whichever general it is, we were talking to him, and John, the photographer, says, "Come on, I want you to come with me." So I went. And so this is what he done. I'm standing and she's standing. She's a model for Belgium, for Holland. And so he wanted to show the contrast, how short I was and how tall she was. And this is all the Frenchmen, the French people treat you as if you were just the end of the world. They're so nice. And the children especially. The first trip I made was, they told me to have some pictures made, and I did. I signed 100, a little portrait, and I signed all 100 of them, and I gave them all out. You see, we don't see there, but there, see the little child holding mine? I could have given away 200. They were all so appreciative. and many of them would cry. This little girl gave me this picture sheet, Joe. I have it at home. Oh yes, this is just when I went back last time in 2016, just looking out over the channel. Now this is my cousin who was killed at Bastogne, and when I was over there, I found his grave, and that's his grave. It's in Belgium. This is in my living room, and in 2016, me and two other veterans, they got us on Omaha Beach, no, not Omaha, Utah Beach, and they awarded us the French Legion of Honor. Yeah, that's true. I never heard anybody say we'd lose the war. We all said we were going to win. Just didn't know how long it was going to take us.
Thank you, Ray.